Welcome to this event sponsored by the Ramor Theatre and as part of Live Network and our activities this year. I'm joined today by Donna Freitas to discuss her new novel, The 9 Lives of Rose Napolitano. This novel has been a really great read. I've really enjoyed it in the last few weeks. I think it would be a great book club book, and I certainly encourage you to go and pick it up. Donna is the author of Consent, a Memoir of Unwanted Attention, as well as books for young adults. She has written for the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. She has also appeared on NPR and the Today Show. She is a professor and she lives in Brooklyn and Connecticut, and this is her first adult novel. Donna, you're very welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be having this conversation.
Well, it was lovely to read this book. It was a real joy and a lovely kind of a surprise because this topic, I feel, is something that we really need to talk about. And when I read this novel, I felt like I've been having these types of conversations with numerous women in my life over the past 4 or 5 years, and just to see it in fiction and done so well and so thoughtfully was really amazing. I know you've gotten some very positive blurbs on the book. I just wanted to read a couple. In captivating sliding doors style, we're offered an intimate glimpse into the 9 different lives of one woman as she struggles to define womanhood. Riveting, astute, and brazenly honest, the 9 lives of Rose Napolitano has left an indelible mark. I won't soon forget it. That's from Karma Brown. And another from Woman's Day. Many of us have had that moment where we wondered what might happen if we took a different path. Rose is adamant that she doesn't want to be a mother, but then she caves to save her relationship. But what if she makes a different choice? In this inventive novel about love, loss, identity, and compromise, we get to find out. So, Donna, my first question to you, it is a really polished, complex, well-written book, and I'm a fan of your other fiction, and I know you've written non-fiction. I think it's an amazing debut for the adult market, so congratulations, and I'm sure it's going to be really well received. Can you talk a little bit about the origins of this book and where it came from?
Well, first, I'm so glad you enjoyed the book, and that's so wonderful to hear. My favorite part of having written a book is getting to connect with readers. So it's really fun to get to talk to you, after you've read the book. So I often, when I'm going to start a new book, when I'm thinking about starting a new book, I take a walk or take lots of walks, and I ask myself, like, what feels really urgent to me right now? And I try to answer that question because I like to write from a place of urgency, something that I need to deal with. And when I asked myself that question again, after finishing my memoir, I knew immediately, the answer came immediately. And I thought, oh, what feels urgent to me is a woman who doesn't want children. And I knew immediately because I also, as an avid reader myself, I'm reading constantly. I'm reading 2 books at once, usually, like my morning book, my afternoon book. I feel like I don't really see that woman in literature much. And, unless she's sort of like the woman in the attic or like the old, unhappy, miserable spinster. And I was like, well, where's the woman who's like me? Like, where's the woman that I am getting coffee with, who's got a career and a vibrant life, but she doesn't have children? And I was like, I don't really know where to find her in literature. And so I knew I wanted to write her, who became Rose, but I didn't start writing the book until I figured out the 9 lives. And so at first, when I knew I wanted to write a book about a woman who didn't want children, but I didn't know how to do it. I was like, well, what will she do? Will she have them despite not wanting them, and then we'll see what happens? Or will she dig in her heels and not have them, and we'll see what happens? Like, what are the consequences? And then I could imagine all kinds of different versions of what that would look like if she had them or if she didn't. And it was only when I was like, oh, what if I could write all the versions? Like, what if in some versions she has a baby and in some versions she doesn't? In some versions when she has a baby, it works out really well, and sometimes it doesn't. You know, in other versions, it also works out well and doesn't. And that was when I sat down to write the book.
Yeah. It's a real page turner, and I think the 9 lives, and I guess how you've written it, it evolves over chapter to chapter from each life based on decisions that she makes. So I think it's a real page turner as a reader. I really enjoyed that. I did wonder, why 9 lives? Were you writing down different scenarios, or is that a reference to, you know, the 9 lives of a cat? Is it a reference to luck?
You know, it just, 9 lives, like, it just is like a phrase. Like, I was like, oh, like, it just popped into my head, like the 9 lives of Rose Napolitano. Like, that was the name of the book from the beginning, like once I started writing. And so it wasn't like I had planned out 9 lives. It just, you know, 9 lives, 9 months of pregnancy, like, it just seemed right. But I definitely, I had a moment when I figured out that I was going to write all these versions. I was actually sitting in a church. I was at a lecture. I was at a conference, and I was at a lecture. And the lecture happened to be at a church, and it just popped into my head, and I had a pen and paper in front of me because I was taking notes. And I wrote the first lines of the book, and then I just brainstormed all the different possibilities of what I could see. And 9 seemed like a good number. I feel like I could have written the 15 lives of Rose Napolitano, but that would have been really unwieldy. But 9 was like a good number. Like, I could explore a lot of possibilities. Like, it felt right. And so that's why.
The book begins and hinges on a very particular conversation that takes place between Rose and her husband, Luke. Would you perhaps read one of those scenes, please? Because I think it kind of sets up the story well, and we can discuss from there.
Yeah, so I'll just read the very first one. So this fight appears in 9 different ways. So this same fight and it's the thing that sets in motion all the things that happen afterwards. So, okay, this is the first time I'm reading on Zoom, actually. So see how it goes. Okay, so this is chapter 1, August 15, 2006, Rose, life 1. I gotta take off my glasses. I don't read with my glasses. All right. Luke is standing on my side of the bed. He never goes to my side of the bed. In his hand is a bottle of prenatal vitamins. He holds it up. He shakes it, a plastic rattle. The sound is heavy and dull because it is full. This is the problem. You promised, he says, even and slow. Uh-oh. I am in trouble. Sometimes I forget to take them, I admit. He shakes the bottle again, a maraca in minor key. Sometimes? The light through the curtains forms a halo around Luke's upper body, the hand held high with the offending object, outlined by the sun and glowing. I am in the doorway of our room, on my way to pull clothes from the drawers in the closet. Mundane things, underwear, socks, a top and a pair of jeans. Like any other morning, I would have folded the clothing across one arm and carried it to the bathroom so I could shower and change. Instead, I stop, cross my arms over my chest, the heart inside it mangled with hurt and anger. Did you count them, Luke? My question is a cold snap in the humid August air. So what if I did, Rose? What if I did count them? Can you blame me? I turn my back on him, go to open the long drawer that contains underwear, bras, slips, camisoles, rifle through my things, disrupting the order of my clothing, everything growing more and more out of control. My heart starts pounding. You promised me, Luke says. I grab a pair of my granniest underwear. I want to scream. Like promises mean anything in this marriage. That's not fair. It's perfectly fair. Rose. So I didn't take the pills. I don't want a baby. I never wanted a baby, and I don't want one now, and I won't want one ever. And you knew that before we got engaged. I told you 1,000 times. I told you 1,000,000 times since. You said you'd take the vitamins. I said it to stop you from tormenting me. Tears sting my eyes, even though the blood inside me pulses with fury. I said it so we could have a little peace in this apartment. So you lied. I turn. The underwear falls from my hand as I march my way to the other side of the bed to confront my husband. You swore you didn't want a baby. I changed my mind. Right, sure, no big deal. I'm tumbling down a hill, we are tumbling, and I don't know how to stop us from crashing. You changed your mind, but I'm the liar. You said you'd try. I said I'd take the vitamins, that's all I said. You didn't take them. I took some. How many? I don't know, unlike you, I didn't count. Luke lowers the bottle, grips it between both hands, palm pressing down on the top, twisting, removing. He peers into the opening. This bottle is full, Rose. He looks up at me again, head shaking left, right, his disapproval pouring over me. Who is this man before me? This man I love, this man I married. I'll stop there.
Thank you. So the book discusses this assumption of motherhood and the pressure of that assumption for women, and does it really, really well. And I guess it's interesting that this conversation of having a child, not having a child, reoccurs in the different lives. But then as the story goes on, we kind of learn that the baby or a child is not the real deal breaker. And I kind of thought that that was really interesting. And in the relationship with Luke, I guess, I don't know if we ever see him in a very positive light because of the situation. We do have glimpses of it, the memories of kind of their early courtship, and then there are some, in some of the scenarios, they develop a kind of a friendship, you know, post what happens. And this was very, I felt true to life, because I think it's kind of, I guess, is it a comment on, you know, relationships, that, you know, there's this promise and the relationship is kind of hinging on this promise she's attempting to make but doesn't want to make. And then it brings up this whole question of her promise to herself, her personhood, her selfhood, and her wishes. And we get to see, I guess, how Luke and other people in the story then orbit around that and orbit around Rose. In the relationship with Luke, and I guess this expectation that comes about, I'm curious to know, because certainly from my life and from women I've spoken to, this is definitely a very topical thing, and tends to come up about women becoming mothers, and the fascination, I guess, with having a baby, and that this is the ultimate joy, the ultimate role. Did it help writing the book to dissect that for yourself? And I'm curious to know what kind of conversations you might have had, either with friends or different people, about this topic. Was the writing of the book a kind of an opportunity to have that discussion, or was that a discussion that you were already kind of having in life that prompted the book?
Well, I have this discussion ad nauseum with everyone and their mother, like literally, I think, in my 20s and 30s. And the pressure I felt to have a child was just so enormous. I was amazed by how much pressure there was to have a child, and how much pushback and disapproval there was when I said I didn't think this was for me. And just the things that people said to me, which were shocking, like, you're going to ruin your life, you're going to regret it, you know, you're going to get to a point in life where your biological clock has stopped, you know, like you're past that point, and you're going to realize that, like, my life is over, I didn't do this thing, and that, like, my life is miserable. And it was just stunning to me. Or like I got called selfish. Like, I mean, just all kinds of stuff, like, you know, even in this day and age, like, oh, well, you just want to put your career before everything. And I was like, so what if I do? Like, haven't men been doing that, like, since the beginning of time? And so, like, but they don't get judged for it. We just assume that's just the way they are. And so I think I felt I was unprepared. I was unprepared back in college for what was coming for me. And once it was there, I was like, why did nobody tell me that this was going to happen? Or like, holy cow, like, people feel like I shouldn't exist. Like, a woman, like, they're trying to erase me. Like, they don't want a woman not to have children, to the point where, like, even if I say I just don't think this is for me, like, this is really not for me, I know this to my core, they are trying to, like, dismantle me and rebuild me into a woman who has changed her mind and wants to have a baby. And I just couldn't get over this. And so when I wrote, like, now, like, you know, I made my decision, And I'm on the other side of it. I'm very happy on the other side of it. I knew though that like this was a conversation we don't have in society. Like I felt like nobody prepares women for the amount of pressure they're going to experience. And you know, if you have a baby, of course, you're judged about that. Like you're judged about you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. You're judged at every turn.
Yeah.
And I just feel like it's so unbelievably unforgiving and ancient that we're doing this to women. And so when I was writing the book, I poured every verboten thought I'd ever had about motherhood, about not wanting to have kids into Rose. And I thought, no one's going to buy this book because no one's going to like Rose. And I was really convinced, like maybe I was going to, like, Rose was not going to be accepted in the world. And what's been interesting for me is there's just been such an outpouring about this book and about Rose, just like a total embrace of her. And it was shocking to me. It was totally shocking. And it has felt like a giant pile of wonderful forgiveness for being like, for that experience. Like there are a lot of women out there that feel this way, but there are a lot of women out there who are mothers or who, you know, already, or who, you know, who aren't planning on becoming mothers, who really see themselves in Rose and in all the thoughts that she's having, whether she becomes a mother or not. And so it's been really interesting for me to sort of feel like this woman rejected in my life, and then to create this woman Rose who's been sort of wildly embraced. It's like somehow like that women all have this secret, like these secret thoughts about motherhood or non-motherhood, and somehow they're like, I've become the recipient of them now, which is kind of exciting.
Absolutely. I mean, I fully agree that we need Rose, absolutely. And for me, it was such an interesting story to read, because I do really feel like she is the woman missing from a lot of contemporary literature. And it was very liberating and sort of reassuring to see this type of narrative. And I guess, like you're saying there, I think there are a lot of women who would identify. And I also think that like this is a book for sure for anyone, but I mean for women who do or don't want children, women who have children, women who don't have children, because I think like one of the things that's really interesting is not having a child is not necessarily an affront to motherhood or to people who do have children. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing, that like you say, the question that arises sometimes is, well, why and what's wrong? And like that there must be some sort of strange reason, and a negative reason, to maybe choose to not become a mother. And I mean, I would believe that we all in a lot of ways are maternal and parental to a lot of different people in life. And I mean, you're a teacher, you're a professor, so I'm sure that even your teaching relationships, we can give of ourselves in lots of ways that are really valid and really important, that are not necessarily biological motherhood or motherhood. One of the scenes that I really loved in the book, and that I thought was especially kind of poignant, and to me felt like in that blurb about it being brazenly honest, it is completely honest. This novel, I really enjoyed the conversation with Rose and her mother, where her mother says, you know, I'm the last person you ever wanted to become. And they're talking about her ambition and her prowess, you know, in her career. And in Rose's life, it seems that the very thing that she's been encouraged to do and supported to do by her mother then becomes the thing that also kind of pulls them apart a little bit. But then they have this really beautiful, profound relationship. I loved that relationship. And I thought for me, that was one of the relationships in the book, maybe more than kind of her relationship with Luke, that just absolutely stood up and seemed very kind of true to life in terms of the type of conversation that might happen. And again, may be happening or might not be happening in people's kitchens or houses, depending on how able they are to have those conversations, I guess.
I think for me, strangely enough, at the heart of this book, so, you know, I wrote this character who doesn't want a baby, and then you see what ends up happening when she does or doesn't. But I feel like really at the heart of the book for me is Rose's relationship with her own mother. And I didn't really know that was going to be the case when I wrote the book. It's been funny because so Mother's Day, at least in the US, is on Sunday. I don't know if it is.
Oh, it's in March here, but yeah.
So here it's on Sunday, and the book just got recommended in this big list of books like that got like syndicated around at the country's newspaper about like what you should buy your mother for Mother's Day. And, you know, one of the things that's been really interesting is that people have talked about how this is such a great Mother's Day book, and which I think is sort of funny because it's, you know, it spins on a woman who said she doesn't want children. But I think really my favorite part of the book is, you know, Rose's conversations with her mother and her relationship with her mother. And, you know, Rose's mother is complicated, but she's also really wonderful, I think. And I think for me, the most meaningful part of the book, when I have reread it, as I have for like revisions, has been their conversations. And so Rose and her mother are extremely different. Like, so Rose is a professor, and she's like a very hardcore, like driven, you know, career person with a PhD, and her mother didn't go to college. And so, you know, her mother and her seem very different. And her mother, especially like early on, as I think a lot of mothers sometimes do, is she feels like Rose not wanting a baby is almost like a critique of her as a mother. Like she must have done a bad job for Rose to not want a baby. And I think sometimes also I've heard from a lot of my friends that, you know, their mothers will be like, oh, you're doing this so differently than I did. You must have thought I was a bad mother. So I think there's this tension between mothers and daughters about how we do things and how we do things differently as a reflection on our own mothers. And I think it's hard for mothers not to feel that way. And so a lot of Rose's conversations with her mother revolve around their differences, but also the ways in which like they still love each other and they sort of find their way through this really difficult conversation. And so, so somehow I think by writing a book about a woman who didn't want children, I ended up writing a book about motherhood and you know, about all the different ways that women do this, and also just about women's relationships with their mothers in particular, and how central that relationship is to our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you did it really, really well. And I so enjoyed that dynamic in the story. One way or another, I guess all of these lives explored, there are things like Addie comes into existence one way or another in different kind of guises. People enter the story inevitably. Sometimes it's a case of timing. I'm trying to kind of not give away all the spoilers in the book, but I feel you will know what I'm talking about. But people enter the story one way or another. It's just whether it's this time or that time. This is a really enjoyable thing as a reader to kind of experience. And I wondered, I suppose, do you believe in destiny or fate, or, you know, what's the role of that in this book?
I've asked that question a lot. I mean, so fate and destiny were not really topics on my mind when I was writing the book. I was just more interested. I was really excited. The structure of the book was really exciting to me to write. It felt like this really generous, I think of novels as these generous forms. They're so big and they can accommodate so much humanity. And the form itself, we can like poke at it and change it and reimagine it. And I love the form. Like I love seeing what it can do. And so I was playing around a lot with structure when I wrote this book. And I am such an indecisive person, and I'm really afraid of making the wrong decision. So I agonize over things. So what was one of the things that was exciting about giving Rose 9 lives was was being like, oh my gosh, like 9 do-overs, how fabulous. Like if only I could have 9 do-overs in my life, this would be perfect. But, you know, I think ultimately I wanted to, like, for me, the end of the book, without giving anything away, it's very open-ended. I wrote it in such a way that I wanted readers to see the Rose they needed her to be by the end of the book. Mm-hmm. So there's a way in which you can decide who Rose is. Like, mm-hmm. I did not decide for you. And I've had a couple people be like, no, but who's Rose to you? And I'm like, no, really. You know, Rose is whoever you need her to be, or maybe she's all the Roses. And that's okay too. And so it wasn't really about fate or destiny. I had this woman who wrote me, I think it was like last week. I've gotten long missives from readers over here, like after they've read the book, like people have like stayed up all night and then written me these really long emails or messages. And she said, one of the things I love most about the book is that no matter what Rose does, she ends up being the woman she was supposed to be. And I was like, yeah. So I sort of feel like, you know, I hope, like, I wonder if, like, if you read it at different points in your life, Rose would end up being a different Rose, according to you, depending on what you needed at that moment in your life. But I like the idea of sort of fragmenting a woman and then putting her back together again.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, for me, it wasn't a book about fate.
Is the book a lesson on future, Donna? I guess there was kind of a moment in one of the lives where, you know, she's kind of being hopeful about Luke and about, you know, will this keep them together? And she uses this image of a stream becoming a river. You know, you kind of get this lovely sense of like expansion when she feels hopeful, when she doesn't feel hopeful. And I guess you go back and forwards in time into future lives and then kind of back to the present moment. But I guess one of the things that I think stands out in the book is there's such a huge integrity in the central character that she seems to travel one path in a way, insofar as remaining true to herself, because no matter what choice she makes, she still very much seems to hold up as a person when others around her kind of disintegrate or take deviations. And I really liked that about it. And I thought there's something about maybe the present moment and respecting choice in the present moment. And when we talk about motherhood and becoming pregnant, obviously there's a kind of a time frame on it because of biology. But I think there's probably a lesson in the book about the present moment always having the value of the present moment, and that regardless of those kind of biological clocks and time frames, what people truly want is what they want, and that should really be respected, because it's a huge part of their identity. You know, it's like when Maya Angelou says, when somebody shows you who they are, believe them, or when someone tells you who they are, believe them. There's that kind of a thing about it. So I guess Rose, as a key protagonist, has that in the past, present, and future. She is always Rose.
Well, you know, I definitely feel like, so this book is not a polemic about not becoming a mother. You know, I feel like, you know, this book celebrates women's choices, whether they become mothers or not. And it also celebrates their choices about marriage and divorce, and, you know, who they love and who they don't, and, you know, career and their relationship with their own parents. So I feel like women's choice is at the heart of this. But I also feel like women's fulfillment is at the heart of this, in the sense that there are many ways to live a fulfilling life as a woman. Some of that fulfillment may come from being a mother, but a lot of it won't. Like, a lot of it will come from something else. And I think somehow we've like told women, or we especially tell women in their 20s and 30s, that the only way for a woman to truly fulfill herself is to sort of like go through this one narrow doorway. Like, you have to, no matter what else is in your life, you've got to go through the doorway of motherhood. Otherwise, you're going to regret it. Everything else is going to become meaningless in your life. And that's just not true. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like more even just the future, like the book is about women's fulfillment and all the many ways that we can live a fulfilling life. One of them is motherhood, but there are so many other things we can do. And motherhood may be one among those many, but it is not the only way. And so I was in the car last night. I went to a very tiny lesbian wedding yesterday with just 8 people. One of my former students got married, and so I gave a ride. We were all vaccinated, don't worry. And I gave a young woman who lives in Brooklyn a ride to the wedding. It was in New Jersey. And on the way back, somehow we ended up, I don't even know what started the conversation, but she said she didn't want to have children, and she's 32. And I was like, and she started like, so she told me the story, and then she started like justifying. She started being like, well, like this is why, and I don't think this. And she started giving me all the arguments. And I was like, people are telling you you've got to change your mind. And she was like, yes, all the time. And it's driving me crazy. And everyone around me is having babies. And I just feel so left out. And I was like, let me tell you something. I was like, stop wasting your mental energy on justifying who you are. And I was like, if I were you, I would just embrace the fact that you don't want children because you can live a fulfilling life. I was like, I'm way past that question, than you. And I really love my life. I'm so glad I didn't have children. Like, I'm really happy. I'm so fulfilled. And she looked at me and she was just like, where have you been? Where are the rest of you? And she was like, I've never met a woman like you. And I was sitting there thinking like, oh my God, this breaks my heart. Like, this breaks my heart that she said that. And then, when we were getting out of the car, I was just like, if you ever want to talk about this again, you can, like, there's lots of, like, you're going to meet other women, like, who are happy, who didn't have kids. And like, but I was realizing like how she was just like, the idea that I could be fulfilled without children, I feel like I've never heard that before. Yeah. Like, no one has said that to me. And so I was just I can't stop thinking about like, how tragic is that we have decided that we have like, that young women who are in their 30s who don't have kids yet really do believe, like I did, because I was there, that they cannot live a happy life unless they do this one thing. I hope the book is about the many ways that women can be fulfilled.
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing. It's like women still need to kind of be given permission by themselves. And, sometimes the example of other women to kind of take that guilt and that burden away, because it is the assumption that people meet and encounter. So absolutely, I think it's a very powerful example to give, both as a writer and personally, Donna. Well, I really, really enjoyed this novel. I think it's excellent, and I will be recommending it to anyone I meet and know over the coming weeks and months. I think it would be a really, really good book for book clubs. I think it's a conversation starter, and it would be really interesting to see what kind of thoughts people have around their tables with this novel. So The 9 Lives of Rose Napolitano, you can go out and get it. And I hope that people do read it. Donna, on behalf of the Live Network and the Ramor Theatre in Cavan, thank you so much for taking part in Cavan Reads and in this particular event.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful to talk to you. And, I hope people enjoy the book.